The armed forces in Sudan and Algeria are following a script that has failed millions of Arabs since 2011's uprisings. We'll explain. The world watches in shock as fire ravages the famed Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. And the World Health Organization opens an eye clinic in the Democratic Republic of Congo for Ebola survivors. Africa 54 starts right now.
I'm Vincent McCory. This is Africa 54. The military leadership in Algeria and Sudan, which each ousted out their long-time rulers after massive anti-government demonstrations, are following a script that has failed millions of Arabs since the 2011 uprisings. Here is Emily Wither with the details.
A tense standoff in the Sudanese capital, Khartoum. Protesters are pushing for a quick transition to civilian rule after longtime ruler President Omar al-Bashir was ousted. Protesters were defiant after an attempt to break up their sit-in. They've been here outside the Defense Ministry since April 6th. Sudan's army has announced that it's removed and detained Bashir after 3 years in power and is setting up a transitional military council to run the country. But the armed forces in both Sudan and Algeria, where protesters have also toppled their leader of 20 years, are following the same script that has failed millions of Arabs since the 2011 uprisings. Reuters special Middle East correspondent Michael Georgi covered the Arab Spring and explains from Dubai.
Something very striking in Sudan is they compared their plight with the template which Egypt had, which was the army stood on the sidelines, which at the time didn't really show what was about to happen. People were happy they weren't intervening, but actually they wanted to get Mubarak out, and the head of the army actually effectively pushed him out because the security was getting out of hand. So the Sudanese people are saying it's either victory or Egypt. They want to avoid that situation where the military exploits the turmoil and makes promises like elections, but at the end of the day, they're still calling the shots.
Any future civilian leader in Sudan or Algeria will need the support of the army. And those Arab Spring upheavals raised hopes of political and economic reforms. But in many places, ousted autocrats have been replaced by leaders who also failed to create jobs and eradicate poverty and corruption. In Algeria, unemployment among the young is high. In Sudan, the protests started over bread prices and poor living conditions. But as Algerians and Sudanese seek more freedom and better prospects, turmoil elsewhere in the region suggests their hopes for a better future may be disappointed.
Well, Emily Withers of Reuters reporting there. Now, Libyan Deputy Prime Minister Ahmed Maitiji on Tuesday claimed Eastern Libyan commander Khalifa Haftar is attempting to stage a coup through military confrontation. Maitiji is calling for the immediate withdrawal of Haftar's troops from the outskirts of Tripoli and western Libya. Haftar's eastern-based Libyan National Army advanced to just outside Tripoli nearly 2 weeks ago, predicting defections and victory within 2 days. However, the internationally recognized government of National Accord has managed to stall their progress in the southern suburbs, largely due to armed groups who rushed to aid them from various western Libyan factions.
We should today, on the 15th and 16th, should have a meeting or a conference with all Libya will attend in Gdamas. This did not happen just because one man, his looking to take powers by forces to control the city and get back to the military period in Libya, which cannot be accepted.
Well, at least 174 people have been killed in the conflict, while more than 750 have been wounded and more than 18,000 have been displaced, as according to latest United Nations figures. Nigerian President Muhammadu Buhari made crushing Boko Haram a pillar of his 2015 election campaign. vowing to spare no effort to ensure that all abducted Nigerians are freed. However, his administration has failed to defeat the decade-long insurgency that has repeatedly carried out attacks on military bases and strategic towns ahead of February elections in which Buhari secured a second term. Viewers Aliyu Mustafa sat down with Lai Mohammed, Nigeria's Minister of Information, to learn more about President Buhari's security initiatives as well as his plans for maintaining sustainable peace through global partnerships.
Good day. My name is Aliyu Mustafa of the House of Service of the Voice of America. I'm very privileged today to have my brother, also Minister of Information from Nigeria, Alhaji Lai Mohammed, and we're happy to have his company at VOA today. Welcome again, sir.
Thank you very much.
Always a pleasure to have you at VOA.
Thank you, sir.
I have a question that has two sides. One is the president, during this election and the last election, basically ran on three programs: fighting corruption, the economy, and the security. Is the president still going along those lines, or are we likely to see some new changes or new initiatives in the second term?
I think those three priorities actually cover the entire governance in any country. Fighting insecurity, fighting corruption, and revamping the economy, I think, says it all. Because there's also this correlation between poverty and corruption. And of course, security is very important, especially given our own particular situation in Nigeria, where we have this terrorist group, Boko Haram, which, but for the coming of Mr. President, terrorize our people and made life almost impossible. And while we might look at Boko Haram as a local issue, but terrorism is a global issue. And that is why some of the things we're doing here is to actually to also seek international support.
Where are we? What is the status of the fight against Boko Haram right now?
I think clearly where we were 4 years ago and where we are today, it's clear that the government has been able to secure the entire territory of Nigeria against Boko Haram. About 4 years ago, about 17 local governments in Borno State alone was under the effective occupation of Boko Haram, and about 2 in Yobe. But today, not one single territory of Nigerian soil is being held by Boko Haram. 4 years ago, schools were closed in most part of the Northeast. Banks were closed. There were no social services. Even the telecoms company had to pack. But today, life has resumed, largely everywhere. So in the fight against Boko Haram, I think we've been able to secure the country. The country is more stable, is safer. But like all terrorist activities, you cannot rest on your successes. And this is why we're still looking for strengthened partnership on the regional level with the multinational joint task force and also at the international level with countries like the US. Because with the defeat of ISIS in Syria, we must not allow them to get a firm foothold in West Africa through Boko Haram.
Well, that was VOA's Aliyu Mustafa speaking with Lai Mohammed, Nigeria's Minister of Information. Now, going back to our earlier story in Sudan, and there is a standoff there between the citizens who want a civilian government after military coup put a military junta in charge up to this point. I want to get a little bit more insight, and I'm joined in studio by Paul Nantulia. He's an analyst and researcher for the National Defense University's Africa Center for Strategic Studies. Mr. Nantulia, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you, Vincent. Great to be back.
We're happy to have you. Now, first, let's start with what we heard from the Africa Union. It's threatening to exclude Sudan from any Africa Union-related activities if it does not install, or rather revert to constitutional order within 15 days. First, how significant is that?
Well, I think it's significant in the sense that the African Union is now trying to assert itself. Remember that there are quite a number of events on the continent, including the Democratic Republic of Congo and Burundi, where the African Union was not able to garner a collective position that enabled it to resolve conflicts in a more constructive way. So what they're trying to do right now is to capitalize on this situation by implementing this very long-standing policy on, zero tolerance to unconstitutional changes of government.
Now, some people have said some of the complexities of a country like that of Sudan is that the military has been really the one running the systems because of the way it is structured. Bashir came from the army. How can this be resolved? You've been in Sudan yourself, you're in Khartoum. How can somebody try to understand the level of involvement of the military and the extent to which you can quickly unravel this and install a civilian government?
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, Sudan has really been under military rule for most of its independence era, for most of its post-independence era. It's been the military that has been in charge. But I think it's important to remember two things. One is that because of this sort of autocratic system that we have seen that even predates President Omar Hassan al-Bashir, who was deposed, just a few days ago, you do have a highly fragmented institution. So the military is by no means cohesive. It has been politically involved. There's a lot of politicization within it. So that's the first thing to remember, and it's playing out in the current dynamic. The second thing to remember is that despite the fact that you've had this system that has been dominated by the military, you do have a very strong and a very extensive and a very sophisticated civil society movement in Sudan. We look at the trade union movement. You look at the composition of the Sudanese Professionals Association. I mean, you have some political parties in there. You have youth. You have women. It's interfaith. You have interfaith leaders. So they've played a political role, and they have essentially been able to take that space to establish a narrative that has demanded for an inclusive process in Sudan.
Yeah, we started at the top with kind of having a comparison and perhaps a contrast with what transpired in Egypt. Yes. Do you see this as very different in the sense that the civil society is more organized as opposed to Egypt, where civil society was so suppressed, except, of course, for the Muslim Brotherhood?
No, you're absolutely right. But you see, the other thing to remember is that this is not the first time that popular protests have led to the crumbling of a military government. We've seen this in 1964 against General Ibrahim Aboud. We've seen it in 1985 against General Jafar Nimeri. And these were instances in which popular insurrections were able to bring civic engagement to the fore. The problem is that in both these instances, the military, the hardliners within the military, essentially hijacked the process, to use the term that the SPA is using, and essentially returned Sudan back to its kleptocratic system. So what the SPA is saying right now is, we've learned from that experience. We are organically rooted in that experience. This is where we're coming from. And we don't want to have a situation where this repeats itself. So that's the reason why they've continued the protest. But they've also been sophisticated enough to be able to know that, to be able to articulate that some members of the military have, in fact, played a very progressive role in this particular crisis.
Do you see this being able to work like a real civilian administration being in position?
Well, the thing is that, they have lawyers in there. They have public administration officials in there, people with experience. They have doctors. They have engineers. Yeah. So they're basically trying to tell the African continent and the world at large that they do have the capability to effect a transition. The other important thing to remember is that they're not envisioning a transition without the military. Yeah. They're basically saying that the military should be able to create the environment to effect that peaceful transition.
Yeah. And we hope things work well. Thank you very much, Paul.
Thank you.
Appreciate your perspectives.
Absolutely.
As always.
Absolutely.
Yes. That's Paul Nantulia is an analyst and researcher for the National Defense University's Africa Center for Strategic Studies. To Europe now, the Paris Fire Brigade says the main structure of the famed Notre Dame Cathedral was spared from destruction on Monday, along with the site's key works of art, after a massive blaze caused major damage to the roof of the building. Some 400 firefighters spent more than 9 hours battling the inferno that sent enormous plumes of smoke across the French capital skyline. As viewers Michael Bowman reports, Parisians and admirers of the landmark building are consoling each other and over the devastation occurring just days before the cathedral was to host Easter Mass.
Early Tuesday, firefighters were still dousing potential hotspots in the cathedral with water. Several hours earlier, the inferno was bringing down the Gothic spire. Hours after the fire was knocked down, people held vigil outside the cathedral Monday night.
I think we have to become a soul nation, and not just a nation. And if today Emmanuel Macron wasn't able to give his speech, I think it's because we, the people, have to give ours.
But French President Macron did speak around midnight, urging the international community to help in restoring the Paris landmark, which sustained heavy interior damage.
Alors je vous le dis très solennellement ce soir.
I am solemnly telling you tonight, this cathedral will be rebuilt by all of us together. And it's probably part of France's destiny, and it will be our project for the years to come. I'm committed to this. Starting tomorrow, a national fundraising campaign to restore Notre Dame will be launched. We will call upon the greatest talents, and there are a lot of them that will contribute, and we will rebuild. We will rebuild Notre Dame because this is what the French expect, because this is what our history deserves, because it's our profound destiny.
Among the hundreds of firefighters responding to the blaze, at least one of them was seriously injured battling the fire, which seemed to bring Paris to a standstill as people watched in disbelief. A host of world leaders, including former President Barack Obama, expressed solidarity with France and getting through the devastation caused by the fire.
It's a really terrible situation. It's more than 356 years of history going up in flames. It's further impactful given that it coincides with the birth of Leonardo da Vinci. It's a history that is coming to an end, of a global heritage, architecture. It's incredibly unfortunate. This is something that will have the world mourning.
The cathedral had been undergoing intense restoration work, which the fire service said could be linked to the blaze. French prosecutors said the blaze was being treated as an involuntary fire, indicating that foul play was ruled out for now. Michael Brown, VOA News.
Well, it's time for our health report, and joining us now is Africa 54 health correspondent Lino Madu with the latest on the Ebola outbreak in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Lino.
Hello, Vincent. Hello, everyone. The World Health Organization's Emergency Committee says the Ebola outbreak in North Kivu and Ituri provinces of the DRC does not constitute a public health emergency of international concern. The news emerged from Friday's committee meeting convened by the WHO Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus at its headquarters in Geneva. In light of the advice of the Emergency Committee, the WHO is advising against any travel or trade restrictions. The committee, however, says they are concerned about the recent increase in transmission in specific areas and the potential risk of spreading the disease to neighboring countries. Ghebreyesus says the WHO remains committed to addressing this outbreak.
Everyone here agrees that we must do everything possible to end this outbreak as soon as possible. The fact that a fake has not been declared makes no difference to our commitment or our ability to fight this outbreak. We're calling on the international community to step up its financial commitment to ending the outbreak. We cannot intensify our efforts if we don't have enough funds.
We are learning every day how to do this better. We are learning how to respond to the demands of the community, and we evolve the response. We don't change it. We evolve our tactics to meet the challenges on the ground while trying to still implement this strategy.
Now, Ebola survivors in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo are facing a number of challenges, including reduced or blurred visions stemming from inflammation of the eyes. To prevent such problems, the Ministry of Health and the World Health Organization set up an eye clinic in Beni, the epicenter of this latest Ebola outbreak. The Ebola outbreak in the Democratic Republic of Congo continues to spiral. To date, more than 1,100 people have been infected and at least 740 have died. The World Health Organization says the survival rate for the viral disease is about 50% on average. Those who survive can be considered very lucky. But for many survivors, the pain continues through post-Ebola syndrome, which includes reduced or blurred vision stemming from inflammation in their eyes. This eye clinic in Beni addresses that ailment.
We're examining the patients earlier than we've seen them previously, and so these patients may not have developed disease yet, so it's something that they need to be followed long-term to ensure that they don't develop complications or eye inflammation. And I think we're all still learning from the Ebola survivors and the eye disease and ocular complications.
A project to address the eye problems has been established with various partners, including Emory University in Atlanta, the University of North Carolina via the Global Outbreak Alert and Response Network, hosted by the WHO. Knowledge gained following the 2014 to 2016 West Africa Ebola outbreak is providing medical experts with more insight on the challenges of post-Ebola syndrome. They say by identifying and treating these problems early, serious consequences, including blindness, can be averted. Centrine is an Ebola survivor at risk from future health challenges, such as sight problems.
I could see they were there to provide treatment. They lit up my eye. I was not scared. I understood they were taking care of my eyes. There are many people, including white people.
International specialists trained 10 Congolese ophthalmologists on how to identify and treat these issues. Moving forward, local doctors will continue to check on the survivors' eyesight.
In collaboration with WHO, we need to see these patients every month to check on those who have received treatment, to see if there is improvement, and for the others, later on, if there are complications such as we have seen today.
The medical team continues to follow up with survivors at monthly clinics where they are provided medical, biological, and psychological care. There are currently over 300 survivors registered in the follow-up program. Turning now to measles, the number of cases in the United States has soared to more than 460, the highest number since 1991. More than 50% of the cases are in New York, where 21 people had to be hospitalized. 5 of them are in intensive care. New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio last week declared measles a public health emergency and has ordered mandatory vaccination in parts of the city. As VOA's Zlatica Hoke reports, the WHO says measles cases are up 300% worldwide this year.
Measles kills about 100,000 people a year worldwide. The viral disease is easily preventable by vaccine, but in recent years, opponents of the vaccination have spread misinformation about the vaccine. The so-called anti-vaxxers, once considered fringe, have used Facebook and other social media to convince parents that vaccines cause autism and other problems for children.
A sister of mine told me her friends had problems, difficulties. They actually told me a story that one of their child was very, very well, he was responding normally, but once he got the vaccines, he did not respond normally.
New York City accounts for more than half of all U.S. measles cases that occurred in the past year. New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio declared measles a public health emergency last week and ordered mandatory vaccination for parts of the city with a penalty of up to $1,000 for failure to comply. But an ultra-Orthodox Jewish group filed a lawsuit Monday challenging the order. Health officials are tasked with containing the virus as well as the spread of misinformation.
We need the religious leaders, we need the community leaders to kind of convince those people that they needed to protect not only their own children, but they have a responsibility to the community and to society to help protect the community by developing this umbrella, as I said, of herd immunity.
Measles is a highly infectious disease and can lead to long-term consequences if not treated. 1 in 10 children with measles gets an ear infection, 1 in 20 develops pneumonia, and 1 in 1,000 brain swelling. In some cases, it is deadly. The good news is that measles is preventable.
There is a highly effective vaccine that works, and it's been used time and time again to stop outbreaks. And the health department is able to provide the MMR vaccine to anyone who needs it free of charge.
There are also large outbreaks of measles in Europe and Israel, as well as in some countries in South America, Africa, and Asia. People traveling to those countries should make sure they have been vaccinated. Zlarica Hoke, VOA News, Washington.
And that's our health report for today. To stay in touch, find me on Twitter @LenorMoudou. Vincent, back to you.
Well, thanks a lot, Lenore. Be sure to watch Lenore Moudou's health reports every Tuesday and Thursday right here on Africa 54. Well, and now here's what's trending. It's been 5 years since over 200 schoolgirls were kidnapped from the Nigerian town of Chibok. And our filmmaker Joel Kachi Benson is taking viewers into the world of Yana Galang with a new 360 virtual reality documentary titled Daughters of Chibok. The 11-minute film, which was shot in February, took 2 weeks to make on a budget of around $11,000. Boko Haram has killed more than 20,000 people and forced around 2 million to flee since it began an insurgency in northeast Nigeria a decade ago. There are still around 100 Chibok girls unaccounted for. Well, next up, Sheriff Ndiaye has been decorating Senegal's famous colorful pirogues for 15 years. Developing his own distinctive style, he's become the go-to painter for many families in this fishing neighborhood on the capital Dakar. As a painter, Sheriff earns between $170 to $250 per boat, depending on its size and design requirements. Many of the boats he decorates feature his signature painting of an eye to ward off evil spirits. The wooden fishing boats first arrived in Senegal from Madagascar during French colonial rule. Close to 20% of Senegal's workforce is in the fishing industry, according to the World Bank. Well, and finally, Israeli researchers say they have printed the world's first 3D heart with blood vessels, describing it as a major breakthrough in engineering replacements for diseased organs. At this stage, scientists printed pink and blue 3D rabbit-sized hearts, but Professor Tal Devere of Tel Aviv University, who led the research for the study, said that larger human hearts require the same technology. He said that given a dire shortage of heart donors, the need to develop new approaches to regenerate a diseased heart was urgent. It takes about 3 hours to 3D print a heart, but the hearts themselves require further development as the cells need to form a pumping ability. And that's what's trending today, and that's our show. Have a good night.